welcome back to NostalgiaCast. I'm Darin Lundberg.
And I'm Johnny Craddock.
And today we'll be covering the 1994 classic, I guess you could say, Forrest Gump, directed by Robert Zemeckis, on Tom Hanks, Robin Wright, Gary Sinise, McKelty Williamson, Sally Field. We got a special guest, Gareth Green, from the best, actually, it was Best Forgotten Movies, and now it's Popcorn Digest. Again, I'm excited to chat with him because he is one of the inspirations for this and the Lady Ghostbusters. It's kind of a weird combination, but Gareth and Andy's podcast was the inspiration for me to start a podcast, and so it's been a long time coming getting him on. It'd be fun to chat. But again, we're continuing our fourth season, and we're covering 90s movies. I guess with Forrest Gump, it's kind of makes sense since we covered Pulp Fiction last time. They were kind of, would you say they were the ones that went head to head at the Oscars that year? Were those the two favorites?
Yeah, didn't Pulp Fiction? Didn't Forrest Gump win over Pulp Fiction? Pulp Fiction. Right,
and then obviously Shawshank Redemption's up there too, as far as big weighty today. Shawshank Redemption's like number one on the IMDb chart. So
really,
yeah. So wow. I guess that's taken over. But again, I remember it being like Forrest Gump versus Pulp Fiction. That was the thing. That was the match made in heaven, I guess you could say. But yeah, so we'll be talking about that. But Pulp Fiction, that was a fun conversation that we had. How did we started that out? That was your choice. How did we come down on Pulp Fiction after all these years?
Yeah, I think we both agreed. I mean, it was a one of a kind movie, and it kind of changed the game. It kind of broke some rules and made some new rules, and people tried to copy it, and it's just become a staple of the 90s. And for me, it's the quintessential 90s movie. So that's why I wanted to start the season out with that one.
Yeah, there's a lot of, we'll be covering a lot of those things. There's a lot of like 90s, like CGI came out, like John Grisham was big. You had a bunch of, there's just a bunch of different 90s things that we'll be covering this season. And Pulp Fiction, it's definitely even though it came almost halfway through the decade, it's kind of the voice of the decade, I guess you could say. I know Reservoir Dogs came out before that, True Romance came out before that, but I think the world wasn't quite ready for Tarantino until Pulp Fiction. You could probably argue that they weren't ready for him even after Pulp Fiction.
Yeah.
But he kind of, I don't know, I would say he was the defining voice. So yeah, like, even though I think we agreed that he's made better movies since Pulp Fiction, but there's no denying the craft and the way that he bent the timeline, just the language, and how groundbreaking it was. And just watching it again, I was still fascinated by the structure of it. So yeah, Pulp Fiction is definitely one that even though it was big, I think it's still it was still good enough to that the impact still reverberates today. Would you say?
Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, Pulp Fiction. So that was, again, fun conversation that we had. Hopefully this conversation about Forrest Gump that we're about to have won't be too heated, but again, we've got a good friend, and I like to call him the creator, the kind of nostalgia cat. We'll have him on to chat Forrest Gump, but before we do that, let's go ahead and watch the trailer.
All right.
Hello, my name's Forrest Gump. Would you like a chocolate?
Oh, thank you.
It's funny what a young man recollects.
You're the same as everybody else. You are no different.
Your boy's different.
Are you stupid or something?
Mama says stupid is as stupid does.
I'm Jenny.
I'm Forrest Gump.
She was my most special friend. My only friend. We was together all the time. We was like peas and carrots, Jenny and I.
Run, Forrest!
Hey, stupid!
Run!
Now, you wouldn't believe it if I told you, but I can run like the wind blows.
Who in the hell is that?
That there's Forrest Gump, Coach. Just a local idiot. I never thought it would take me anywhere. They even put me on a thing called the All-America Team, where you get to meet the President of the United States.
Congratulations. How does it feel to be an All-American?
I gotta pee.
I believe he said he had to go pee.
Now, maybe it's just me, but college was very confusing times.
Have you ever been with a girl, Forrest?
I sit next to them in my home economics class all the time.
Have you given any thought to your future?
Go! What's your sole purpose in this army?
To do whatever you tell me, Drill Sergeant.
You're a damn genius. You are going to be a general someday, Gump.
Yes, Drill Sergeant!
They sending me to Vietnam.
Listen, you promised me something, okay? If you're ever in trouble, don't try to be brave. You just run, okay?
Okay. Where you boys from in the world?
Alabama, sir.
You twins? No, we are not relations, sir. For some reason, when I was doing seemed to make sense to people.
Forget about me and get yourself out!
Been awarded the Medal of Honor.
How come? Now, my mama was always telling me how miracles happen every day. Some people don't think so.
Jenny!
But they do. You can come home with me at my house in Greenbow. I'll take care of you.
Why are you so good to me?
You're my girl.
Paramount Pictures presents Tom Hanks.
I'm not a smart man, but I know what love is.
Robin Wright.
Will you marry me? I'd make a good husband, Jenny.
You would, Forrest.
But you won't marry me.
Gary Sinise.
I never thanked you for saving my life.
And Sally Field.
My boy Forrest is going to get the same opportunities as everyone else.
A film by Robert Zemeckis.
What's my destiny, Mom?
You're gonna have to figure that out for yourself.
The world will never seem the same once you've seen it through the eyes of Forrest Gump.
My mom always said life was like a box of chocolates. You never know what you're gonna get.
Okay, so Forrest Gump, directed by Robert Zemeckis, starring the great Tom Hanks, Sally Field, Gary Sinise, Robin Wright. Was she Robin Wright Penn at the time, or is she just Robin Wright? I think it just.
I don't know. She's just Sean Penn's ex-wife.
Yeah, something like that.
I think at the time of this, she was Robin Wright.
Robin Wright, yes. So was this before? Was this pre-era Sean Penn? Because I think there was like she was in Princess Bride, and then she kind of did like a bunch of like, you know, like minimalist stuff, and then she showed up in this, and then it was like, oh, look, she's a great actress.
It was post Buttercup, so maybe it was pre Sean Penn.
Okay, anyway, the less we can talk about Sean Penn in a podcast, the better. So, Johnny, we wanted to invite our next guest. I would actually call him an extra special guest, Gareth Green of the Popcorn Digest podcast. How are you doing, my friend?
I'm okay. It's getting late today. I'm up way past my bedtime for it's a school night now as well, with it being a Sunday evening.
Okay.
But, yeah, I'm happy to be here. I can't wait to get talking about this film with you guys.
Good. Well, we'll try not to talk for 3-4 hours about this movie that we could probably chat 3-4 hours about. But yeah, just a little bit of an intro to you, Gareth. Just from my perspective, you are one half of the team. You and Andrew Raphael. You're one half of the team of Popcorn Digest. You were Best Forgotten Movies at the time, but you're one half of the team that inspired me to create NostalgiaCast. And I think I've told you that before. It's just I think in 2015 when you guys started, I was kind of in a creative rut. Like I was tired of movies. I wasn't that interested. I was reading a lot of things with kind of meh. And then your podcast, your first episode was Ants, and then you did like an Ants versus Bugs Life retrospective. And just the way that you and Andy talk, it kind of got my creative juices flowing again. Like it kind of got my brain working. And then so I started to think, and the more I listened to you guys, the more I was like, maybe a podcast would be fun. Like to be able to talk about movies. And then with the other thing that kind of kicked us in the gear that Johnny and I have talked about is the Ghostbusters or Lady Ghostbusters of 2016, when all the like the death threats against all the women of the movie were coming out, and it was like nostalgia's like can be a weapon. It could be used for good for evil. And so that your podcast combined with that nostalgia kind of that's what created NostalgiaCast. And so, like I was telling Johnny before we recorded, I owe you guys a lot. Like if it wasn't for you, I wouldn't have had that creative flow back, I guess you could say. So this is having you on is a big deal for me. I just wanted to say that first.
I mean, well, first off, thank you very much for the lovely comments about the podcast as well. But I would say that the best thing about the podcast that we worked on, Best Forgotten Movies, it was called originally, and then Popcorn Digest, is that to hear that it inspired you to create NostalgiaCast, which is a great podcast in its own right, completely divorced from that, is absolutely fantastic. That's one of the best things I can hear about anything that I've done. And I mean, to be honest as well, where that podcast came from was just simply me and Andy in it. We found ourselves in a similar rut to yourselves, talking about films and where cinema was heading at the time. And we found ourselves talking more about like weird, like not quite the weirdo films, but the films that from the 90s as well that we were getting less of now, which were kind of being forgotten by time. You know, these kind of like Ants was a big one to begin with, because Ants is such a strange film to watch now. And it feels like few risks are being taken. So we wanted to have a look at those films that kind of missed the mark and whether or not they deserve to be remembered more fondly. And at the time, it started off more positively, but we found ourselves unearthing a good few very odd ducks along the way.
Yeah, I mean, just some, you guys are what 70? What episode was your last one that you published? I think it was for Spectre. Is that the one?
It was for Spectre, yes. Yeah,
Okay.
that was it. And I think that was like 71 or 70. So yeah, that's where we left off last, due to personal reasons within our lives, kind of thing. Right. It's just that famous story of life getting in the way. But we are looking to go back to recording, to kickstart that podcast again, ASAP. Right,
because the world needs you. And just like you and Andy, you know, Jonny and I, we grew up together, and so that's where we started bonding, was over movies, especially these 90s movies that we're kind of focusing on this season. But again, just kind of to blow more smoke up your skirt, like if you're talking to the episodes that, I mean, True Lies, you did Inner Space, Death Becomes Her, which I'll probably be referencing since that's a Zemeckis movie. Inner Space was one that I forgot how much I liked it, so listening to that episode, it made me go out and buy the disc, so I have that DVD because of you guys. Same thing with Bowfinger, the way you talk about that. I mean, obviously you've done your James Bond, like you did on Her Majesty's Secret Service and License to Kill, like Spectre you just did, Waterworld. You've even done movies that, and this is going to lead to another question that I have, but you've done movies like X-Men Origins Wolverine, or Superman 4, the quiche for peace, as you like to call it, or Star Trek 5, or Cats. That was a really fun one to listen to. But you guys, some podcasts will look at these flops or these terrible movies, in quotes, and that's all they'll do, is they'll just kind of nitpick it to death and make fun of it. But the thing that I love, and again, out of all those that I mentioned, that Star Trek 5 episode was particularly interesting because of the way that you guys, again, that seems to be the redheaded stepchild of that franchise.
Yeah.
But you and Andy, the way that you were able to talk about that movie and all the meanings and the different, like, you know, just what Shatner was going for and how he was kind of sidestepped or had the rug pulled out from it every turn. Just the way that you guys talked about that, it made it so much more than just the how did this get made things. It's just funny to nitpick them. You guys actually delved into the meanings of the movie and came out with positives. And so, you know, you talking about having like coming across some weird ones, like I especially like that you're able to chat about those things. I mean, what kind of feelings do you have when I say stuff like that?
Well, I mean, that's great for us, really, to be honest, because one of our mission statements when we began the podcast was that no episode, no matter the film, no matter the reputation for that film, there wasn't going to be a single episode that we would walk into having this preconceived notion that it was terrible, especially if we hadn't seen it. Obviously, there are films like Cats, which, for example, I saw before the podcast, and I just said, this is the episode to begin. Like, this has to be one of the episodes. But there are other ones, even films like Virus, for example, the much maligned Jamie Lee Curtis starring a monster movie. There are films like that which suddenly we found ourselves liking in some way or another. And it was surprising to us. If we had gone into that podcast with the notion of let's try and think of as many funny ways in which we can tear this film down, which many podcasts do, and we certainly do have fun with it, but we are very open to the idea of enjoying a film regardless of its reputation. And I'm glad that you take away from that even the films that we dislike, even the films that we find to be heavily flawed, there are still positives to take away there, because that's always our goal, really. No film is a complete write-off, with probably the exception of Cats.
That makes sense. Yeah, that was a really, Johnny, I don't know if you like listening to that episode, and you even, I think, what is it, Facebook or Twitter, that you posted a picture of Andy like in his cat's garb, because he had that. Oh my gosh, that was so fun.
That was a revelation to me while we were recording. I had no idea Andy had this incredible history with Cats as a production. So that was just a wonderful episode to record anyway.
Yeah.
So Gareth, I got a question for you. First of all, I love the accent, man. Like, I had to mention it because I get kind of fascinated by the English accent. My ancestors are from England, so I have the English, in me, but I don't have the accent. I got a question. Do we sound different to you? Do Americans sound like you guys do to us? You know what I mean? Like, because we're fascinated by the English accent. Are you fascinated by the American accent?
I am. I actually feel like the American accent is better suited to podcasts than my accent is, for example. I don't know, it just seems to work better, but yeah, I am. And it's strange, really. I having recorded a few podcasts, having American friends as well that I often speak to, much the same way as they're interested in the kind of the wealth of accents you get in England and, well, the UK over such a small area. I'm interested in kind of like how there's incredible variations of accents in states as well, that kind of thing. It does seem like it changes quite a lot depending on where you're rooted as well.
Right.
So at the same time, I feel like the preconceived notion of accents over here in the UK of Americans is more like everybody does the same Southern American accent, which is going into Forrest Gump. Everybody does the same Southern American accent, which is crazy to think how big the American South is. There's probably a great many accents there. But,
I'm in the South right now, actually. I'm actually in Texas, and so we hear a lot of the y'alls and how y'all doing? Y'all eat? Yeah, y'all hungry? That kind of thing. But of all the episodes you've done on your podcast, do you have a favorite? Which one's your favorite?
Cats was up there, but there were some issues with the quality recording at the time we were still getting to the bottom of. I'm just trying to think which one was particular. There was one that I liked a lot, which was Kingdom of Heaven, because that was a film that I had been building up for a long time. I wanted to have a look at the director's cut of that film in particular, because I don't think there is a film out there that has quite the quite the difference between
just had a cat attack. Gareth, I don't think the cat liked your cats.
What the heck, man? That's the first time that's happened. Yeah, leave it in for sure. That's something I gotta leave in.
All right, yeah.
But yeah, Kingdom of Heaven, most certainly, because there's no other film out there that has the difference of quality between the theatrical cut and the director's cut. One of them is, for me, barely watchable, and the other one is a stone cold masterpiece. And I think that one we really nailed what worked about the film and what the differences were. And I've listened back to that one, and that's one of the prouder ones. I mean, I go back to the early ones, like the Ants and Bugs Life ones, where we were still finding our feet. And I'm so glad that, Darin, that you got a lot from those episodes, but they're hard to listen to now for me personally. But yeah, Kingdom of Heaven is definitely.
We also have our favorites and our not so favorites of our episodes. So we understand how that works. Is there one of your episodes that kind of woke you up to the filmmaking of it? Like, and did that kind of like, you know what I mean? Like, as you're kind of discovering the movie and watching it for the podcast, and you kind of go, whoa, this was amazing, or this was like, this sucked. Like,
yeah.
Give me an example of one.
Well, I would say that because I come from a film background anyway, in terms of my education, I did go to university to study film and that kind of thing. I was always awake to the filmmaking side of things, but in regards to the podcast and it's finding its feet and integrating that, I think Revolver was the film that made us change our entire setup and our entire structure, because it was just such a batshit movie to review. We couldn't go through the normal process of just going through the timeline of the film beat by beat, which many podcasts do, and it works for them. But for us, for that, I couldn't fathom where to begin and where to end. And that forced us to create a new structure. And to be honest, that's the structure that we keep to today as well.
It's the Guy Ritchie movie, right?
That was, yeah.
Okay.
It was.
Yeah, that's one of Johnny's favorite filmmakers. Yeah.
It's the enigma wrapped in a mystery delivered with a headbutt. That's right. That's Revolver.
Yeah, you talking about our first, when we're trying to find our feet too, that's the thing. Like I have a hard time listening to my voice anyway, but like when we were trying, there was we did The Frighteners, again, another Zemeckis kind of produced, and we went through beat by beat, and the episode when it was done was like 3 hours. And I remember talking to Johnny going, why are we talking about The Frighteners for 3 hours? Like there shouldn't be a reason. And so we've reformatted it since then. But, you talking about your film background, that the question I was alluding to earlier is listening to your podcast, especially episodes like Kingdom of Heaven or like Star Trek 5, like I mentioned, like you don't really talk about your background in film. You and Andy don't, you just kind of, it's like you kind of, and this is going to sound like a backhanded compliment. I don't mean it to be, but you just kind of showed up on scene and you like, listening to other movie podcasts, you two on a regular basis, you school like actual film critics, it seems like, that have been at this for years. The way that you look at movies, the way you talk about things, the topics that you bring up, it just seems like you guys are film experts, like you've made films. And again, you have your YouTube channel where you've made some short films. You've obviously got The Visualists with MK Rhodes, you've got Bargain Binners, you've got all these other projects, but every time that I listen to you, no matter what you guys do, it seems like you've got a stronger education and a stronger point of view than most actual film critics that have been celebrated for years. I mean, what was that? What was Andy's film background as well? I mean, and you talked about your film education. Where do you think, not that Johnny and I are experts at film writing, we just like really chatting about them, but where do you think your expertise comes from? How do you get that point of view?
Well, again, thank you for the lovely comment as well. I think the reason that we don't really talk about it is just simply because we have that kind of English humbleness about ourselves, which we don't really big ourselves up. There's no egos involved with this, but I do have like a film background. I did study film production and media production as well, and that just gave me the chance to work with a lot of great upcoming like filmmakers and writers and some old actors as well, over a series of films and shorts. And it applying that to the podcast, it just came naturally to us as well. But we didn't want to go out of our way to talk about ourselves in any big way. We wanted what we said to do this speaking for us. And Andy probably has a much deeper film background than I do, as he's composed music for film. He's has a background in music as well. He's currently a music producer as well, works with a lot of really solid upcoming bands, and his work is off the charts. And he does everything on the technical side for the podcast, so he makes me sound good. And so applying that to the podcast was always our starting point. But we never really wanted to go like I say, we never really wanted to make it about like the ego of this is why we're qualified to talk about this. We just wanted to simply record what me and Andy talked about when we were together anyway, because that was just a natural conversation to us. That's just how we talk. Whenever we had a meet up or a stay over or that kind of thing, we would always create a night of a marathon of movies, and we would just talk over them and say what we felt. And one day, one of us, and I can't remember which one, said we should record this, and that's where that came from. But yeah, thank you very much. That's a lovely compliment, and I'm glad that comes across as well.
Yeah. Well, again, we try to be full of compliments here. It's just if it comes off a little more aggressive this time, again, it's just because we own NostalgiaCast to you. I don't mean that to be flowery or anything, but it's just the fact of the matter. It's if it wasn't for you guys, and again, a lot of these things, podcasts, we're feeding off of each other, right? Yeah. Like we're making each other better, and we're I like how this podcast did that. Maybe we can integrate some of this stuff, and it's just all about making kind of a better world. And you're right, like age or gender or skin color, it doesn't matter what our backgrounds are. What matters is we want to know where our opinions of movies come from. But it's about talking about movies. So at the end of the day, if you guys, if you just, like I said, if you guys had just walked off the street and were talking, I would think you guys were experts. It's that kind of, it's just the way that you chat about these things. That's what's important. And it's about engaging. So whether or not you have an education, whether or not you're a filmmaker, again, it'll be great if we could get you guys on in the future. It'd be great having Andy on, because then Jonny and Andy could just geek out about music, since they're both musicians and produced albums and things like that. So that'd be fun.
Oh, fantastic. Yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah. So again, we want to make this maybe the first of any conversation. Again, I don't mean it to be blowing up smoke, but you mean a lot to us, and I just want you to know that. So, and
honestly, that's to say to her that it influenced this podcast is just the greatest compliment of all. But I think honestly, you've run away with it. It's an excellent podcast.
Well, we appreciate that, Jonny. Just before we get to the last thing I want to mention is the first time I've ever felt like a celebrity is Andy and Gareth did an episode on the Wolfman. And I remember listening to the episode, and all of a sudden they mentioned my name, like toward the end of the episode. My name was mentioned. I was like, what? What's happening? Like, have I ascended to a different plane? And I think it's just because, like, you were the first podcast that I was engaging with. I think on Facebook, I'm off of Facebook now because I can't stand the rhetoric that's going. But like, you were the first podcast that I engaged with, that I commented on, that I asked questions. And again, that's where you and I became good friends and good chatters, is just on Facebook and chatting about these, and we engage with each other's podcasts. So yeah. And then again, you mentioned me during the toys episode, which I thought was great. And then Jonny, they just did an episode of The Abyss that I was trying to get you guys to do The Abyss forever. And so at the beginning, you dedicated that to my honor. So again, it's just the way that we're feeding off of each other. It's just like, I can't put in words how much we appreciate that. So again, this is going to be great talking about this movie with you. So
yeah, I can't wait.
Yeah. So let's get into it. As far as Forrest Gump goes, Jonny and I, so what happened, just to explain to you and explain again to our audiences, when we do NostalgiaCast, we kind of take movies from the 80s that we haven't seen in like maybe a decade or 12 years or 2 decades. And you see it in a Walmart bin, and you're like, oh, that's $5 or $3.50. I'll spend that amount, like trying to let's see if this movie was good or not. And then you watch it and you're either like, oh, this is crap, or oh, this is a much better movie than I ever expected. Right. And so there's a train coming, so you have to forget that. But when talking about these movies from the 80s that are kind of like no one's ever heard of, it's hard to like build like an excitement for those movies. I don't know if that makes any sense. And so at the end of last season, we were recording, Jonny was like, I think I want to do let's do movies like Big Lebowski and Fargo, and let's do like Speed, and movies that we want to talk about, because those are movies from the 90s, like you mentioned, that's where our film education came from. And so spitballing that and festering in my mind, I was like, let's just make this season about 90s movies and how that kind of defined us. And let's talk about those movies that defined us. And so you and I chatting about on Twitter about Forrest Gump, that was a great way to bring that into the conversation. Again, that's where I was like, oh, let's get you on for that, because I've been trying to figure a way to get you as a guest. Let's do that with Forrest Gump. And so that's where this season was born. So Forrest Gump, if you're talking about a film education, it did awaken my senses to how films were made or how films were critiqued. But if we could each go through our memories of the movie itself, and then we'll talk through our conversation what we think of the movie now. But Gareth, what were your first memories of Forrest Gump? Did you see it in a theater? Were you hyped for it? I mean, what's your history with Forrest Gump?
I think I've mentioned on my podcast before, on my own podcast, that there are a series of films that I grew up with that were simply within the limited range of VHSs that my grandma had. So, and Forrest Gump was one of them. It was just so every time we stayed over at my grand's house, Forrest Gump would be one of the films that we would watch. But I do remember this film coming out. I was born in 86, so I must have been around about 8 years old. Maybe 7 years old, and I remember my mom and dad going to see it, and I wanted to see it because it starred Tom Hanks, and Tom Hanks was an actor that everybody my age liked at the time as well. I grew up on films like Big, and I remember just having this desire of really wanting to see it, and I got it for my birthday on VHS sometime after, whenever it was released. And so it's one of those films that's been in my life from an early age. And it's also one of the films that my perspective on has changed remarkably over the years as well. Which you did ask me a while ago when I mentioned about coming onto the podcast as well. You asked me to think of a film, and it took me a very long time to get to Forrest Gump, because I with the title being like NostalgiaCast and thinking of films which have a lot of nostalgia for me. I was trying to think of some weird old films that I grew up with, but my mind, I every single one of them was just it hit me with a no, that's not right, that's not right. And when I hit Forrest Gump, eventually, I was like, it was on TV. I put it on again, and I was like, oh, this is the film. This is it. This is because there's no other film in which I've is it that I've changed or the film has changed over the years? That kind of thing has happened here, and I don't think there's another film in my life that has that arc with me.
Interesting. Jonny, what was your history with Forrest Gump?
Well, Darin, you and I have a mutual friend, Mike. He went and saw this movie when it first came out in the theater, and he could not stop praising it. He put so much into it, and he was telling us how great it was and how we needed to go see it. And because he hyped it so much, like I kind of like put off seeing it. I was like, I don't know. I don't know if I want to see that movie. You know what I mean? I just couldn't really get myself excited about going to see it. And so I waited till it came out on VHS. And then I could say I liked it. I watched it. I liked it. And I was like, this is pretty good. And I thought the acting was great. I mean, maybe looking back on it, it might not be as great now, but I think there were some really great things in there. Like Gary Sinise obviously was one of the best things about the movie. But there's a lot of things I like about it. But at first, I wasn't really too excited about it. And then I kind of like, slowly over time gained appreciation for it.
Okay. And then just quickly with my history, I did see this in the theater. Gareth, we talk about this all the time, as I would go in the summer and stay with family because my mom was, single and she didn't have time to take care of me when I was in school. So I would go to New York and Brooklyn and hang out. And so they would take me to movies. My cousin and I went to go see Forrest Gump. Again, this was the summer of The Lion King and True Lies and Speed, all that. And so I knew that Tom Hanks was in it. I knew that Robert Zemeckis directed it because, again, Back to the Future is one of my defining movies of my life, basically. And so, but I didn't know anything about the movie. I just knew Tom Hanks was in it. Robert Zemeckis directed it. That's good enough to get me to go see it. So we went in blind. We had no idea what the movie was about. We knew he played kind of maybe a simpleton or someone that I associate simpleton with someone with a Southern drawl, like we're talking about earlier. I don't mean to do that, but when we watched the movie, it's one of those movies where if you don't know what to expect, and it hadn't been hyped for you or anything like that, or it kind of blew me away at the time because of the filmmaking, because of the epicness of it, because of the performances. I just remember, and maybe that's an issue, maybe not so issue, but maybe that's the deal with a lot of people that watch this movie, is they walk out on a high of having an experience of the movie. Yeah. And I think there are parts in it. There are some very good sentimental, heartbreaking moments in it, especially the part where Forrest, like, he realizes, he's got a son and he's like, is he smart or is he? And for the first time, it seems like he's acknowledging that people know that he's stupid. Although I have picked up on other things since then in the movie, but there are moments like that are so heart-wrenching that you walk out thinking you've experienced something that you've never seen before. And it's one of those movies where you think this is so great, everybody must like this. And then you start reading reviews like from Owen Gleiberman or Leonard Maltin, or I think Janet Maslin of the New York Times gave it a negative review, where people are looking at it negatively and you're like, what? Why don't you like this movie? Like, it's one of the greatest things I've ever seen. And then I think it's like that nostalgia or the rose color, when the dust is settled, and it just, to me, this is a movie that once the dust is settled, you start questioning things like, wait a minute, like, hold on, like what's with, and so those are the things we want to discuss. But all very good stories. We're all coming at it from different angles, it seems like. But if we wanted, before we get into our opinions of it, how about we talk about the things that aren't above, that you can't criticize, like the performances obviously are great, the filmmaking is great. Let's talk about the performances first. Gareth, what do you think, like, acting wise, how does this movie work for you?
I mean, it's one of those films in which I've always felt was a very high standard for performance. However, it is also a film in which it took me a long time to come to this conclusion, but I now find Tom Hanks's voice funny.
My name's Forrest Gump. People call me Forrest Gump.
which I never did originally, but now when I hear it, it does make me laugh. And I think that's something to do with how much this film has been parodied over the years as well. It's like I can't help but see the film through a lot of the parody of it as well. So, but I do feel like the performances are solid. In particular, one that was mentioned was Gary Sinise. I think his is a fantastic performance in this film. And for considering the character is really a sticking point for me, Robin Wright in this film is truly excellent as well. I really like her in the film, although I have issues with her character that we will come to discuss later, I imagine.
Okay. And then, Johnny, what about you? What do you think about the performances?
Well, I know from watching some of the behind the scenes stuff on this movie that Tom Hanks didn't really know where he was going to go with this character. Like he didn't really have it down, didn't have the accent or the voice style that he does in the movie. He didn't know what to do with it until they cast young Forrest.
Are you stupid or something? I'm as stupid as stupid does.
And so then he started mimicking young Forrest. That's just how he talks. He didn't do anything special or different. That's just who he was as a young boy. And so Tom Hanks started mimicking him and started like trying to develop his character through that. And that's where it came from. The filmmakers and the producers weren't too excited about this voice that Tom Hanks was doing because it was just too goofy. And they're like, he can't talk like that throughout the whole movie. Like, this is not going to work. I mean, obviously we know it does. However, that's one thing I was going to mention is over the years, looking back on it, it's the one thing that I think is a little over the top. Like, I have a hard time sitting through it because of that. Like, I want him to like be a little more subtle, because I know people who, actually do have some, handicaps, and they don't. Like, another example is the kid in Breaking Bad. Like, I know he actually has the
cerebral palsy.
Yeah. But I know people who have it, but they don't talk. It's not that exaggerated. You know what I mean? I don't know. Maybe I'm looking into it too deeply or whatever, but I thought Tom Hanks over exaggerated. I think it could be a little more subtle. But I do agree with you. Gary Sinise was great. I think Robin Wright was great. I'm not so fond of Sally Field's performance. I think she was okay, but like for some reason she also kind of annoys me in the movie.
I was just going to mention, I do think from what you've said, it is a very wise idea though, that he, rather than base a performance in, for example, like Rain Man, for example, going to to copy a disability or exaggerate a disability in some way, or like a mental disability. It doesn't. It instead it feels more like an Arrested Development in regards to him copying this child, essentially, that this was how the actor spoke. I do think that works, but I 100% agree with you. I think it's how much he pushes that to a line, and sometimes it does cross that line into like self-parody for me. At the time I saw the film, I loved it and I thought it was excellent. But over the years, to see these type of performances, and to, as you say, to know that I have many people in my life as well that have various disabilities, and some of them that affect speech and that type of thing. And like you say, this is not how anybody within that range speaks, in my opinion, either. But it works for the film as well.
Yeah. You talking about it becoming a parody, that's kind of an interesting, again, it's, I think the story was the producers, or Zemeckis, no, Hanks wanted to kind of maybe dial it down at the beginning, but Zemeckis was like, go in, like, no, lean heavier into the and that's where he started looking at the Michael Humphreys and his performance. I think it's interesting that if you're going to do movies about like mental illness or disabilities or things like that, a lot of times they kind of pretty it up. Like the conversation you guys just had, it reminds me of A Beautiful Mind, how they kind of made schizophrenia exciting.
Yes.
And having friends or people that are schizophrenics, I remember watching that movie going, this is like not a good representation of what these people go through. And so, but everybody's different. It's just, I don't know if they were I don't think they were trying to make fun of the slow talking Southern drawl, but you're right. Over time, becoming parody is kind of that does kind of where wend its way in. And Johnny, talking about Sally Field, I think everybody does their job. Like McKelty Williamson is great. Like everybody, they show up, they do what they need to do, and I can't fault there's no bad performance in this other than I don't know the name of the guy, but in the 60s in the Black Panther Party where Jenny, her boyfriend or whatever, you could tell that he's acting.
Yeah, that was the one I was actually going to point out as well. I don't know who the actor is, but that role for the short time that he's in it just does not ring true whatsoever.
Yeah, you can see him arguing in the background with Jenny, and then it's like he's waiting for his mark, and he hears Tom Hanks say so, and then he turns to, and then you're obviously just waiting for. So that's the only performance that I can really fault in this. So performance-wise, Tom Hanks obviously was big because his second Oscar 2 years in a row.
Yeah,
that's the other thing I was going to say too. I think Tom Hanks was good, but I don't think it was Oscar-worthy good.
That's a sticking point for this film as well over the years.
Yeah,
it's been less about what Forrest Gump is as a movie, and more so what it represented as an Oscar-winning movie, and what other films lost out at the time.
Yeah, Gareth, we just did this is our second episode of the season. The first episode that we just recorded was Pulp Fiction, and if you're looking at movies, my problem with the Oscars is that they're not very indicative of what's going to last. They seem to be indicative of what's popular at the time, which again, Forrest Gump, if you look at Oscars, that's the Oscar-worthy movie. Like it gives Academy voters everything they need to feel good about themselves to vote for it, right?
Yeah.
Obviously the filmmaking, which we'll go into in a minute, but if you're looking at it, like Pulp Fiction has a stronger stamp. Like if you were to do Oscars, that's the one that maybe should have won. Even Shawshank Redemption, which didn't really build until much later, that's got a bigger impact than Forrest Gump has.
Yeah.
I think Forrest Gump just kind of hit really big to start. But yeah, that's always, that's an interesting sticking point. But maybe the other thing too, that the thing watching it again this morning, and again, before we get into the story, the biggest positive I have for this movie is the filmmaking. Not so much the special effects, because I think like integrating Tom Hanks, it works because they do the right graininess and things like that. But if either of you guys have seen Zelig with Woody Allen, the way that they were able to integrate his character in archival footage, they use blue screens. It's the same basic thing. They just did it this time. And I think people just hadn't seen that kind of technology before. So I like the way they integrate that and have Forrest showing up. But, when you see Kennedy talking or LBJ talking or Nixon, when their mouths are moving, those effects don't date too well.
Yeah, no, they haven't. There's it has the same effect as a lot of bad de-aging does now.
Right, where it was good for the time, and it kind of
it was excellent for the time. Yeah,
they didn't manipulate footage in Zelig the way that they can manipulate footage here. But the thing that I walked away from, again, talking Pulp Fiction, and its influence, the thing that I walked away from watching that again was, the structure of this is still amazing. It still feels revolutionary. And watching Forrest Gump this morning, again, not so much the special effects, although those are good, but when they're in the 50s, when they go to Vietnam, when they're at the Washington Monument, the 80s, when he's jogging, things like that, you feel like you're there. Like the Vietnam, it gets a full scale reenactment. And again, it was interesting because I keep bringing this up, talking Pulp Fiction and talking about like the meta kind of commentary. This movie kept reminding me, especially in the Vietnam sequences, of other movies. It reminded me of Apocalypse Now. It reminded me of Full Metal Jacket. It reminded me, later when Born on the 4th of July, I was going to say that Gareth Sinise does a better Ron Kovic in this movie than Tom Hanks did Ron Kovic. So it did kind of comment on movies that we'd seen before. But again, the Vietnam sequences are so well done, and immersive. And I can't fault the filmmaking. I don't know how you guys feel. Gareth, are there any takeaways from the filmmaking that you...
The filmmaking side of things is exactly where I am on board with this film. In particular, you've just mentioned it. In my notes, I've mentioned about how strong the Vietnam section is for the film in terms of the visual identity of the film and how they managed to create Vietnam without really going outside of California. In fact, it shares a lot with Full Metal Jacket in terms of the way that they approached Vietnam from a filmmaking point of view. In Full Metal Jacket, the production never left England. With Forrest Gump, the production never left California, and they do a lot really to sell that. There is some obvious CGI background work going on, which is it's obvious now, but at the time I remember being really wowed by that. And I suppose as well, in terms of my background with the film, with it being my first time watching this was on VHS, you noticed all of that stuff much less. It feels far more integrated because the picture is a lot less clearer. But I always just assumed over the years growing up that they must have gone to Vietnam or at least a country with a very similar climate. And that was something to find out later on in life was being like a real wow moment for me. And Zemeckis has a lot of things like that going on in the film. I like the way that he always approaches in this era of Zemeckis, not so much as Polar Express, creepy dead-eyed corpse being animated to interact with children phase of life. But through this period, I really do feel like the way in which he integrated CGI into his films as being like part of the story, so to speak. To couple this with, for example, Death Becomes Her and how that's used, it's not showy as in to say the special effects are here and, you know, flash, 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 here we go. It's more so like the things like that worked with Vietnam where that I didn't notice it the first time I watched it. And so I do feel like on the filmmaking side, the Alan Silvestri score as well is it's lovely. It's very nice. It's a little saccharine, but so is the film. But it's just a very lovely score to listen to. I really like the cinematography as well. I feel like the filmmaking, as always with Zemeckis at this period of time in his career, is solid. And there's not much negativity I can take away from that. It's I have more conflicted feelings when it gets to the writing of the film.
Yeah,
when on that is where, for me, I would say the writing of the film and some of the directing in regards to, and this is a topic I want to get into, which was I feel like Zemeckis and Eric Roth are on opposite sides of the spectrum when it comes to this film, in that one of them is a very sincere writer. He's very earnest, and the other one is quite cynical and satirical, and those tones are at odds with each other throughout the film's entire runtime. And that's, I would say, in terms of the filmmaking side, that's where this film falls down for me, where it just comes down that notch for me.
Yeah, like you mentioned, the filmmaking for me, I can't. There's never a moment where I don't believe that they are where they are. So you're talking Zemeckis being very, you know, he falls in love with the technology, and I think he falls in love with that, and then he tries to figure out how he can wrap a story around it. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. I'm not a Back to the Future 2 fan, because I think the heart is missing from that. But and you talking about, I wanted to bring up Silvestri's score too, because listening to the commentary, it's interesting. When Zemeckis and Silvestri were talking, they were trying to figure out how they were going to integrate soundtrack versus score. And Silvestri said, how about I handle the emotion and the songs, and the soundtrack will handle the landscape. So if you're talking about Vietnam, those sequences, you know, the Creedence Clearwater Revival, all that stuff, that's the landscape. That's to set the tone of where they are. But then when characters start dying, and there's a scene with Bubba and all that, that's where the music score comes in and kind of, again, maybe saccharine. It nails those moments. But you're right, the score is lovely. There are moments, you know, the first time you see Jenny on the bus and the piano theme or whatever that plays, it pulls at your heart, and it's just a wonderful, like whimsical, like heartfelt moment, and the music does a good job for that. But Jonny, before we move on to what Garrett, that's obviously going to be the meat of our conversation, is where the story integrates. How did you feel about the filmmaking? What were there anything that you noticed watching it again recently, or any takeaways?
I mean, there's a lot of things that are really great about the filmmaking in this movie. First of all, I know it was shot on location in South Carolina, and what they did was they found all these different locations in the same location. So they built a house for Forrest's house, and then they had Jenny's house, you know, down the street, and then they had Vietnam like across the way. So it was all kind of in the same area, and they were able to save money that way by like shooting on basically one location, even though they made it seem like several locations, which is, you know, a great guerrilla style filmmaking thing that, you know, should be used in this kind of movies when you want to save money. But anyway, I mean, there's a lot of great things. The cinematography, like you mentioned, was great. I actually think the script's pretty good. Some of the dialogue's pretty good. I do like the special effects. I was always blown away by how they got rid of Gary Sinise, Lieutenant Dan's legs, and the way he was able to swing his legs out and swing his legs around tables, and how, you always expected to see, how they did it, but you couldn't really tell how they did it, and that was always kind of for me.
Well, that's the thing they do. They purposely set shots up so that you question how in the hell they did that.
Right.
Did they really cut off Gary Sinise's? There's a part where he flips through the table or whatever, that spindle table, and you're like, how did they do that? Like, was it a fake floor? And I think the table was CGI, but those are the things that really. And later when he jumps off the boat, they added like a part of the boat that his legs would have swung through, so it looks like.
Right.
But they're adding all these pieces to make you question and sell the reality of it, and that's another major thing that I think a lot of Zemeckis is a master when it comes to effects. We all know that. But a lot of people could learn a few things about placing those barriers in between, so that it sells the image more. I don't know if that makes any sense.
Yeah. But overall, I mean, this movie, it does take you on a journey. You do get invested in the characters. You do, that you laugh at times, you cry at times. I mean, at least I did. When Jenny dies, you get a little tear, forming. So I mean, it does its job. It does a good job. But my biggest issue with it is just Tom Hanks's, over the top, Forrest Gump accent. But
interesting. Well, let's obviously the performances we're in agreement on those. The filmmaking, the thing that's interesting, again, this ties in with what you're going to talk about, Gareth, is I watched maybe 6 or 7 explainer or like what this means or kind of reviews of Forrest Gump. The interesting thing about watching all 7 of those is not one of them agreed on what the movie was about.
Yeah.
They all mentioned that it was about something different. What's weird about this movie, and this might be my problem with it, my biggest issue, is that there are so many different things you can take away from this movie. You can look at it as, it's Forrest Gump and he perseveres and he has his humanity and it's about tolerance and it's about like unconditional love and that kind of thing. And so you can walk away and just the tragedy of losing, and you fall into that, the stuff with Jenny and things like that. But there are so many meanings you could walk at. The thing that settled with me that we'll talk about is that I think this is a very ugly movie in the message that it's saying. And so Don Burgess does the cinematography. It has these very, very pillowy, gorgeous kind of cotton candy shots. But to me, and I'm not sure if it's a flaw or not, it runs counter to this ugly message that these gorgeous images they're up against like an ugly ideals. And so this is, again, if you look at, like, Drew McWeeny has a very famous thing where he looks at the point of this movie as the only reason like Jenny and Dan are having such hard lives is they don't give in to the establishment. Mm-hmm. They're trying to buck the establishment or question authority and things like that. And so how I look at and other people look at the movie like a baby boomer, I think Lieberman said it was like a baby boomer movie for the Disneyland generation or something like that. It's an interesting thought. But the thing that's interesting to me is that Forrest, what is the theme of this movie? Like, what is the idea? We're all going to have, how do the images support that? So I'll just tell you my point of view, and then you guys can go into your point of view, what you think it means. But the way that I look at it is that Forrest, this is kind of example of storytelling. Like, things don't happen because, like, Forrest is literally, he's just standing there and somebody hands him a flyer and says, how about you go to Vietnam? And so we go to Vietnam. Like, that's the next sequence. There's nothing, like, it's not because or therefore storytelling, like Trey Parker and Matt Stone talked about, which is more impressive. I don't know if because again, the point is you're being floated along on a breeze. But it seems to me that the message is that if you don't go along with the establishment, if you don't do what popularity says you should do, if you don't do what the man like wants you to, then you're going to suffer for it. Like, Jenny decides she's going to be part of the hippie culture, which was trying to fight against authority, right? She mingles with the Black Panthers. She mingles with like anti-war, marches and things like that. And she gets involved in drugs. She suffers for it. She's suicidal. Like, her whole life, she's been, and there's the scene where she, let's fly up far, far away. Like, Heavenly Father, God, fly me away so I can get away from here. And then she suffers because she's trying to fight authority. Lieutenant Dan is the same thing, where he doesn't, you know, he was supposed to die in that field, but again, instead of like just going with the flow, he like rails against the authority and what's happening to him, and he suffers for it. He becomes Ron
Horrible.
like this. Yeah, and so the only way at the end of the movie that Jenny and Dan are able to find happiness is they give in. They like, okay, I'm gonna get a girlfriend, or I'm just gonna go back to my life before with Forrest and things like that. And but Jenny still dies.
Yeah.
You know, I don't know. It's just, and if I'm looking at the images, or the images kind of buck against that. But as far as a theme that keeps coming up, that's the theme. It's like, what is this try? Is it about unconditional love, or is it about you have to be an idiot to believe in those things? I don't.
Yeah.
What, Gareth? What you were, you know, gearing towards talking about what you thought, but what are your opinion? What's your thoughts on what Forrest Gump is?
Well, one of my things about this film is that I genuinely don't know what it is about. I have ideas of what it is about at times, and one of the first things I wrote in my notes on this particular watch, and it's something that I've always felt about this film that I'm, you know, just beginning to articulate, which is that it does appear to be, for me, at least in the first and second act, of which there are many acts in this film, that it is like a satire on the idea of the American dream, that we have this white guy with the whitest background, which is that his grandfather was part of the Ku Klux Klan. I don't think it gets whiter than that. And I think he even mentioned he was the founding father or something of the Ku Klux Klan, which is a very iffy background for a main character. But as long as you don't question authority, as long as you live a very simple life, and Forrest Gump is the epitome of simpleness, then everything will come easy to you within this American dream of a life. But at the same time, like, because you mentioned it as being about like, I do think that there is something else going on in terms of like, they mention it's like destiny or randomness floating on a breeze and that kind of thing, and that we should all submit and float on a breeze. I think the thing, though, when it comes to looking at that idea, is that it doesn't work if the main character is a person of color. Like, if we make the main character a person of color, regardless of whether or not he accepts whether or not he challenges authority or not, or, you know, if he just submits to life and goes along with whatever comes his way, he's still going to have an incredibly different life than Forrest Gump, even with that starting point. And I think that kind of like it becomes a very narrow focused film in terms of who its message applies to, in my opinion. And but at the same time, when I look at the beginning of the film, I do think like that's all. It's very prominent for me. It's very everything is kind of tinged with this this dark message, this dark comedy. I think even Quentin Tarantino pointed out that it does work like a dark comedy. But yet, when you get to the last act of the film, the sincerity and the earnestness is just so, like, it's pumped to max that it loses any of its bite. And by the time that the film's credits roll, I'm in conflict with myself. Like, well, what is it then? What is it about? Like, is it a critique on this idea of what the American dream is, that it's only applicable to this simple white ideal, or is it actually endorsing this way of life? I don't quite understand. So that's where I am with the scripts, and I think that's exactly where in my opinion that the conflict comes from. I do think like Eric Roth, looking at it is Eric Roth, isn't it? It's he did Curious Case of Benjamin Button. And when I look at his films are very earnest. His films are very like they wear the hearts on the sleeve. And Curious Case of Benjamin Button is always one that people go to because it has a very similar structure. And I think although he and Zemeckis have clearly had a great working relationship with each other, I do feel like there is a clash of outlook there as well. By the end of it, I think Zemeckis has kind of submitted to the earnestness and the sincerity, and that's part of the problem with me with this film on a writing level.
Listening to the commentary. The commentary I listened to was with Zemeckis, and then it was with Steve Starkey, the producer. Well, this movie's about, you need to go through hard times to be able to know what's meaningful. And yeah, I can kind of see that from the Jenny and the Lieutenant Dan perspective, but not at all from Forrest's perspective, because he doesn't change. Like he doesn't, there are times that it registers, like again, when he realizes he had a son, but he doesn't, he's basically the same at the beginning. What are we learning from Forrest? Because it seems like the saccharine-ness of the cinematography is telling us that we're supposed to side with Forrest because he sees the beauty in everything. But then you have it's always funny when it goes obvious, like I said, Jenny mentions the "Let Me Fly Free as a Bird," and then later the part where she almost commits suicide, it's scored to "Free Bird" from Leonard Skinner.
Yeah.
Obviously, it says you can't change. The way you see Dan dirty and he's disheveled and he's with hookers all the time and he's just depressed. It paints those two characters as having these ugly, terrible lives. And Forrest always bathed in these golden glows. So to me, I watch it and I'm conflicted. What am I supposed to, the cinematography is telling me one thing about a character, but who am I supposed to side with? You know what I mean? Johnny, do you see any of these deeper meaning? And what do you feel about the movie now versus, other than Tom Hanks, versus then?
Well, I feel similarly to both of you. I think I have a hard time figuring out what it's about as well. And I see your points, that it does look pretty, but it does have kind of the ugly message behind it. But, I think maybe that was the point. Maybe that's what they were trying to get across, the moment where Forrest is running across country back and forth for 3 years, and he sometimes steps in crap. That's the thing. Sometimes that happens, that's where that bumper sticker comes from. It happens in life. We all go through it. Maybe that's the whole point.
Yeah, it's just interesting. I don't Johnny and I did an episode on Raising Arizona, and that movie's very clear. That movie's about parenthood because every scene talks about parenthood and childishness and all that. But it just seems there's 8 or 9 different messages going on at any given moment during this movie.
And I think as well, Forrest's awareness of the situation, is how present he is in any given vignette. It varies as well. I think that the part that works for me, and we've spoken about this before as well in the filmmaking, the part that worked most for me on this particular watch was the Vietnam section, because it doesn't come with a moment of Forrest not really knowing what situation he's in. I think it has a kind of grotesque attitude towards sexual assault. It often plays it for very dark laughs in terms of Forrest Gump's a reaction to it when he mentions about Jenny's father. He says Jenny's father was a real loving man.
Yeah,
and because he's always kissing. I'm like, oh, that's really grotesque to say, to make that a part of the movie, is in it's played for a very dark laugh. Forrest doesn't get that there's real sexual assault happening here.
But
I feel like the Vietnam section of the film, specifically when he's rescuing everybody, Forrest does seem to be very much aware of the situation he's in and the gravity of it. He's not making any jokey misunderstanding of what's going on. When he sees that Bubba is hurt, his reaction isn't one of an over the top some offhand over the top message like the previous one. He just simply says, oh no. He realizes straight away. And I think that those moments work for me when Forrest just suddenly becomes aware of what is happening in the world. And another moment, you've mentioned it already, is when he sees his son for the first time. It does have its moment where he doesn't realize. First it says his daddy's called Forrest too, but then you have that moment, and it is a great moment. It's played really well, where he's like, is he simple, though that makes Forrest a little bit inconsistent as well. Its message, it makes him a bit inconsistent as a character, because I never know what his true understanding of any given situation is from one scene to the next, really.
There are 3 points that came to mind. Number one, Hanks's performance, the scene where he realized, is he smart, or is he? What always got me about that moment is so Forrest is aware. The first time I saw it, Forrest is aware of his situation, and that's what made it heartbreaking, because you're he knows. We've gone through this whole movie, but then watching it again this morning, especially with subtitles on as I'm listening to the commentary, there's a moment, you know, like you said, Gareth, the moment where because Jenny tells him to run, right?
Yeah.
But where he sees Tex, he runs in, and there's a look that Hanks gets on his face of, I'm going to have to rescue this guy. And it was like, that's an awareness that's in conflict with what him running. Like, and so I was like, well, hold on. Like, so he knows that, like you said, the situation, and it becomes, like you said, there's no ironic distance. It's all of a sudden very sincere and it's very heartfelt. And then later there's a part where, you know, he's talking in voiceover about Lieutenant Dan. It's like, Lieutenant Dan didn't like to be called crippled any more than I like being called stupid. And then I was like, so, all right. So he's aware before I even, to me, that moment at the end was lessened because they have those other moments of awareness. It's interesting too. Again, you have the part where Forrest goes to visit Jenny in college, and it's almost like an exact copy of George McFly saving Lorraine from Biff in Back to the Future.
Yeah.
You know, when he sees the assault happening and he goes and he helps. If Forrest doesn't know, oh, he's being very loving, but then also knows that Jenny's being hurt in that car and he reacts, to me, it's a conflict of, so what's happening in the writing here? Is he aware or is he not aware? Like, does he choose moments to, so I don't know. It's very, and the other thing too is when you go through history, like, again, if you look at all the things that it's the Ku Klux Klan, it's chain gangs he experiences, Elvis Presley, obviously, civil rights movement with the George Wallace standing in front of the University of Alabama doors, the Kennedy assassination, Vietnam, hippie culture, the Black Panthers, the Me decade with the 70s, Watergate, Hurricane Carmen. I thought was funny that it didn't occur to me that hurricane was an actual thing. And then finally AIDS. You have all of these momentous like moments in history, and Forrest is triumphing over all of these because he doesn't engage.
Yeah, he's
detached from everything. But then Dan and Jenny are engaging, and they're suffering. They're going through hell.
Yeah.
So I don't know, man. Like, it's not like Back to the Future, Who Framed Roger Rabbit, or even Death Becomes Her, where it's very clear what the through line is for this movie.
Yeah.
But Johnny, like you said, maybe it is to get us talking. You know what I mean? Like, you walk out and you chat about these. Maybe it's good that we're arguing these things instead of just thinking, oh, it's a nice story about a mentally handicapped person that triumphs. You know what I mean? I don't know. Like, Johnny, do you have any thoughts about that?
No, you kind of summed it up pretty well. But what I want to say is, one thing I admire about this movie is the fact that they made the movie they wanted to make. Like, they had pushback from the studio. They had problems with budgets, and Hanks and Zemeckis kind of gave up some of their salary for back end points to make the movie they wanted to make. And so I really respect that, and I think they made a good movie. So it still holds up. I think it's worth remembering. Because they did what they wanted to do, they didn't let anybody else tell them what they can and can't do. So I admire that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Definitely.
I mean, I still think as well, with regards to this film, like one of the things that's a great conflict in myself with how I look at Forrest Gump is that I find it a very easy film to watch. I still find it a very easy film to watch. I have great many conflicts with its messages and what it's trying to say and how it depicts some characters. I mean, we mentioned as well, like we've already talked about Jenny, but there's a lot of irony in regards to how Forrest looks at life, and there's a lot of satire going on there, in my opinion. But with Jenny, there's none of that. It's just, it all feels a little like very hateful, but at the same time, like, because the filmmaking's so good, because this is a Zemeckis film and he knows how to make a film, and because the performances are largely all there, it's a very easy film to watch, even with those conflicts at the front of my mind.
Yeah. If we were to, like, if I don't usually rate movies, but if you're looking on like a four-star scale, I think Forrest Gump is what I would like a 2.5-star movie. It's, the ambition is there and there's no fault in the filmmaking. And it's just so, like you said, it's easy to watch. Your eyes are constantly dazzled, either by the performances or by the cinematography. But just, again, the message is just weird. Like, it's so conflicted. I don't know. I get that it's fun to talk about. Like, it's the difference between a Batman versus Superman and a Justice League. It's like, you want to at least talk about a movie instead of evaporating in your mind before you even leave the theater. But again, Forrest Gump is way better than Batman versus. I'm not trying to equate that, but you know what I mean? It's like, I don't know if arguing about the movie, I'm just arguing. I don't know what the point is. So even though I'm arguing, I still didn't know what the point of the arguments are. So it's an ongoing conversation that there's no end to, because the movie, I don't even know if the filmmakers are completely clear on what points they're trying to get across.
Yeah, and there's also this running theme with the film in regards to the people, the prominent figures that Forrest Gump meets in his life. And a lot of the time, his interactions with these characters are framed against various assassination attempts, full-on assassinations, horrible deaths. And it almost feels like The Irishman in a way, in which every time a character is introduced, it has this little bar telling you exactly how they died. And I still like, I like that. I think that's fun in some grotesque way, but I still don't know what that means.
Well, if Forrest becomes kind of a celebrity when he's out jogging, right? And all of a sudden, in the comment, again, I keep bringing this up, but in the commentary, I think they said, well, it's fun that it's flipped. And instead of him meeting celebrities, he's become a celebrity. And I was like, well, shouldn't that mean he should have been assassinated? Like, I don't
They should play that same gun sound effect that they use over and over again.
Just something, right? So, yeah, I don't know. It's just, again, I think we're all in agreement that the movie's very pretty. The movie, it has an impact, and people that watch it, if you like this movie and you walk away being moved by it, great. Like, I'm glad you're able to see that. Just somebody commented earlier today that they're happy that even though I hate this movie, because I chatted with him about how I don't like it, even though I hate it, he appreciated that I talked about it. And so, but I don't know if I hate the movie. It's more, I hate the ideas that it has, but I love the presentation. So that's why it's kind of a 2.5 star kind of. I see both sides, but most people, I don't want to say anything. Like I said, it's a school night, Gareth. We could talk about this movie for another hour or two. And so I think that's kind of where we settled. Does anybody else have anything they want to add to our Forrest Gump conversation? Any last thoughts?
I was just going to say from earlier, we're talking about Vietnam. They actually had to redo all of that Vietnam sequence with ADR in post, because I think some of the sound got messed up during the filming, so they had to go back and redo everything. So everything you see with them yelling and screaming during the Vietnam, fighting sequences, that's all ADR. That's all, Tom Hanks and Gary Sinise doing voiceover work, which is pretty impressive.
Yeah, it's not like Sam Jones and Flash Gordon. Hey, that's ADR. It's not noticeable. It's that, again, that goes to the filmmaking.
The other thing
Mother Humpers from Tremors.
Yeah, Mother Humpers. That's right. Let's keep this PG-13, guys.
A small side note is when you search for Forrest Gump on Netflix, Full Metal Jacket comes up.
Of course. All right, so that was Forrest Gump. Again, Gareth, thank you. I'm going to do it again. If it wasn't for you, we wouldn't be here. I hope you guys keep you talking about your new season and new ideas and new podcasts. Make those as soon as possible, because I can't wait to hear you and Andy again. Again, like I didn't bring this up, but you've got video essays. Like if anybody out there, and again, you've got like the English kind of the humility, so maybe you won't bring this up, but you've got video essays on Alien that I loved. Like every film scholar should look at that essay that you did. You've got essays which tied in with NostalgiaCast, where you looked at nostalgic filmmaking when you did The Force Awakens. I thought that was a nice tie-in. And again, the Manchester shorts that you did, or the short that you just, The Girl Who Lost Her Doggy. Again, they're very atmospheric, and you've got signs of a great filmmaker in you as well. Again, if you're not going to blow smoke, I'm going to blow smoke again. But where can, if you want to react to any of that, but like, where can people find you, and what can we expect from you and Andy coming up here in the future?
So, I mean, people can find me on Twitter if they search, I think it's like Gareth Green or Imperial Mints, which is a name that comes from Star Wars, the Imperial March, the Imperial Mints. It was like a joke. Nobody, nobody but me and one other university tutor laughed at. If you search for me on YouTube, the podcast that I'm on, it used to be called Best Forgotten Movies. It's now changed to Popcorn Digest, so that we can talk more about films in general, regardless of their background. And that podcast is coming back soon as well. Unfortunately, it's been stop and starty over the last 12 to 18 months due to personal reasons, as I mentioned, but we are coming back soon. And we are currently just focusing on what the films are that we're going to discuss. Just to give you an idea of a couple straight off, one of the first episodes that we're going to come back with is, and this hasn't been talked to death at all, but we want to do a Joker versus the King of Comedy versus Martin Scorsese kind of approach that subject, and hopefully we are going in completely open with this as well. No preconceived notions, and we're just going to look at where the line between homage and ripoff is really, and other films. We're still going to be talking about films like The Blob, for example,
the Chuck Russell, the remake.
The Chuck Russell remake. Yeah.
Okay.
The original is like a favorite of mine that I saw as a kid. But yeah, we're going to be looking at like the Chuck Russell remake. I know that another one that we've got on the table at the moment is Star Trek: The Motion Picture, which is something I cannot wait to speak about.
Again, the way that looking at Kingdom of Heaven, looking at Star Trek V, looking at even Superman 4, the quest for piss, all these movies, you approach them with equal gravity, and just the way that you're able to, with Kingdom of Heaven, and chat about, come at it from a different, like, comparatively, it's going to be fascinating listening to that Martin Scorsese Joker kind of homage or ripoff. It's going to be fascinating listening to you, Andy, talk about that, because I love the way that you guys attack things like that. And again, I really want other people to get addicted to that. So yeah, again, at Imperial Mint's Popcorn Digest, check all these things out. Visit that YouTube channel. Gareth, thank you so much for coming on. I hope this is the first of many conversations, because, feeding off of each other, I really want to make this a thing between us.
Oh yeah, this is the beginning of a very fine friendship.
Face-to-face on Zoom friendship,
yeah,
as opposed to social media. I got it. Okay, perfect. So
well, thank you very much for having me on as well. This has been excellent. And yeah, I can't wait to come back and talk films with you guys.
Okay.
Maybe next time we can do our best English accents. You do your best American accent. We'll see how it works.
Yeah. Give me time to prepare.
Yeah, we'll give you a good month in advance to be able to prepare that. Okay, perfect. Gareth Green, you're the man. We appreciate you. We wouldn't be here without you. So.
No problem. Thank you, guys.
Okay. Look forward to hearing from you again. We'll see you.
That's all I have to say about that.
That's the right on, man. You said it all. What's your name, man?
My name is Forrest Gump.
Forrest Gump!
Again, we want to shout out a big thank you to Gareth Green of the Popcorn Digest. That was like I said, I was nervous about that conversation before, not because I, intimidated by him. It's just, after all these years, 2015 is when their podcast started. So it's like, 7 years since that inspiration kind of took hold in my head. And it's been that long since I've been able to have Gareth or Andy on. So I was just nervous about finally, I guess, coming full circle, I guess you could say.
Yeah, no, that's understandable. I mean, you hold him in high regard. He was the inspiration for the NostalgiaCast, and I understand that, so I can see why you would have been nervous. But it was definitely fun having him on, and that's a great pick. Forrest Gump was fun to talk about. So again, thanks, Gareth, for coming on and bringing that movie to us.
Insightful as always. Okay, so for our top, and again, that was just the beginning of a conversation. We look forward to having them on a lot more in the future. For our top, for our outro topic, usually we pick a top 3. We were kind of bandying about some topics, and then the topic you came up with, I think, is pretty fun. I think, how did we come? What was the topic, and how did you come up with it?
Well, we're gonna do our top 3 worst accents in 90s movies, and so I thought of it because we talked about how Tom Hanks's Southern accent and the way he did his mentally handicapped or whatever savant voice that he came up with was kind of over the top, in my opinion. I don't want to diminish what Tom Hanks did. I think he's a great actor, and I think there's some really genuine moments in Forrest Gump. And I did mention in the episode that I don't really think it was Oscar worthy, but there were still some good moments. But the voice always takes me out. And there are moments when the voice is just too much that I think he's acting. You can see that he's acting. And so you kind of go, wait, that's Tom Hanks? That's Tom Hanks. That's not Forrest Gump. Do you know what I mean? So I just, it's the voice that takes me out, even though I really do appreciate and admire the movie. But so let's do our worst 90s movies accents.
Okay, I expect there's going to be some overlap and obviously some ones that maybe our listeners will expect. But you go ahead. Are we doing like sort of top three, bottom three? How?
Let's do like 3, 2, 1. How about that? 3, 2, 1.
Okay. I don't know if I have like them in order or whatever, but because they're all equally bad. It's just weird. We'll chat about them. But why don't you go ahead and name your first worst?
Well, my first one that I thought of was John Malkovich's Russian accent in Rounders.
Okay.
And I picked that one not because it's really that bad. I just picked it because it's so bad that it's good. You know what I mean? Like you hear it and you think that's interesting, and then the more you hear it, I mean, that's kind of fun to listen to. You know, you kind of get hooked on the way he does it. I remember like seeing I don't know, the documentary or like something with Matt Damon. He was saying that when we got to set and John Malkovich first started doing his Russian accent, they all kind of paused and went, "Is that how he's going to do it?"
Are you going to do it like that?
It's bad, but it's good at the same time. It's so bad, it's good.
And let's see, was it who was it that directed Rounders again?
That was John Dahl.
Okay. Okay. So yeah, so that's, I know that you've talked about that in the past. That's kind of surprising that you would have picked John Malkovich. That didn't even occur to be in there. But would you say that it's a performance that, I mean, is it one of those things that he's going for it, or is it like kind of
it's almost cartoony. It's kind of over the top, but at the same time, it's realistic. You know what I mean? You start to believe it after a while. You know, when he's like, "I am still up this 20 grand from the last time I stick it in you." You know what I mean? So it's right. Things like that, and you go, "What was that?" But yet it's something that you end up like quoting over the years and becomes like part of your. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I hear you. Okay, so. Some of these are so funny. The one I'm gonna pick for first is I'm gonna pick John Voigt from Anaconda.
Okay.
Just, you know, we could pick. Maybe you'll have one of these choices, but like some of the other ones that were notoriously bad acts, I can excuse because they're like production problems, stuff like that. But then there are others that the director just let the guy go, like just go for it. Like there's no holding back. And so John Voigt, he's kind of like a Tony Montana. I can't explain it. Like he's like, you know, the parts of J-Lo where he's like, "You need protection. Been a long time since I been with a woman." You know, he's just like, and he's always like, he's making these weird faces. And so it's like, I can understand, like in a movie like that, you're kind of in a movie that's crap, right? And so you're like going for it. You're like, this movie's crap. It's like, but I'm gonna have a fun time. I'm getting paid for it. Right. And he does that, but it's like, come on, man.
Yeah.
Like, what are you doing?
Never into it.
So yeah, I mean, it's a fun, entertaining in a B monster movie. It's a fun, entertaining performance. But again, there are just times when you're like, what's happening? You know what I mean? So all right. So that was my pick. What's your pick for the next worst 90s movie accent?
Okay. My number 2 is Keanu Reeves in Bram Stoker's Dracula.
Okay.
And I had to pick that one because it's notoriously bad. And I just remember when I first saw it, I think I saw it at your house for the first time. And when I saw it, I was like, what is he doing? Like, why does everyone else sound different? And why doesn't he sound like, you know, I don't know, it didn't mesh. It didn't work well.
Right. Okay. So, and we, like you said, we talked about that during our
Bill and
what
Ted's.
was it? Yeah, Bill and Ted's episode. And it was one of those things where it's like, we wanted to tread lightly because we like Keanu Reeves, you know, and we like that he tries things. And so it's hard to pick on it, but again, he's just such a sore thumb in that movie. And it's like, because I think all we knew him from really at that point was Bill and Ted, right? I mean, that was the thing that made him so famous. And so we just thought that he had that, you know, the dumb California surfer dude accent. And then to hear, I don't know, it kind of comes through in the British accent. I know that Coppola said that he tried to talk him out of it, but Reeves wanted to really, really go for it and really nail that. But because he tried so hard, it just came off as really stilted.
Yeah.
And so, but Coppola even says, I think that, you know, I don't want to make fun of him because I just admire the guy so much. So even Coppola like really likes Reeves. So my next choice, again, we're trying to go from this performance always cracked me up. Have you ever seen The Specialist with Sylvester Stallone and Sharon Stone?
And Sharon Stone, right?
Rod Steiger's like this mobster, like that they run into. Is he Italian? I don't even know what nationality he is. But like, there's literally a scene where it's James Woods as his number one hitman, And then Eric Roberts is the son, and he ends up getting killed by Sharon Stone because of some kind of vendetta. So James Woods goes in to talk to Steiger, and it's literally, it reminds me of Laurence Olivier and the Jazz Singer. It's just, the accent is so over the top that you're like, again, you're like, come on, what's happening here? Like, are we supposed to take this seriously? Like, he goes in and James Woods like, I'm sorry about your son. And he's like, you're sorry? My son is an open casket and you're sorry. And it's like, oh my gosh. And it's hard because you start laughing in the middle of the scene that's supposed to be, and I don't know, The Specialist is not something we're going to be covering this season. It was just one of those movies that it's just so po-faced, but then you have these silly accents, and it's hard to take that whole, and even the sex scenes in the movie are just so weirdly shot. It's just a weird movie. But yeah, that Rod Steiger performance is an all-timer for me. So all right, so there was that. What was your, and are we at number one already? Yeah, we're
number one. Yeah, I'm gonna say Kevin Costner in The Prince of Thieves. But the thing is, there is no accent. He didn't try.
Yeah.
I mean, so like, again, it just didn't fit with everyone else. Everyone else seemed like they were of the time of the, you know, of the time period, and he just wasn't. Like, it was like, what, why can you even try? You know, just try to sound like you belong.
Yeah. Well, that was one of the things, like, that's my number one as well, because everybody just coming around about it. I mean, we talked Keanu Reeves, you've got, like, I think Varsity Blues at James Vanderbeek, and that has John Voight in it. But everybody's accent in that is, I think, so, you know, the Southern accent doesn't work. You've got Brad Pitt in The Devil's Own. You've got Julia Roberts in Mary Riley, who tried to do Irish accents. I don't even think Tom Cruise had that believable of an Irish accent in Far and Away. I just remember him talking to Nicole Kidman, like, tell me you like my hat. Tell me you like my suit.
Actually, you know what? I like that accent. I think it's a good job in that one. I think that's pretty
fine.
accurate.
It's fine. It's not like the Steiger one or the Keanu Reeves one. They kind of make you chuckle. Like, it's not supposed to, but they make you laugh, and it's not supposed to happen. With Robin Hood, I can kind of excuse it because it was like a tumultuous production, and Kevin Reynolds and Kevin Costner were at each other's throats. And I think the rumor is, like, because his accent comes and goes, right? Like, some scenes he has the British accent, some scenes he just doesn't. There's literally a scene, you know, when they first arrive on England shores, and like Robin Hood, like he's on the sand and he's kissing the sand or whatever, and he has his cronies try to attack Morgan Freeman's Azim character, and then, you know, they finally come to an agreement, and Costner's like, Robin Hood goes, "Come, Azim," and he's like so excited, and then he picks him up, so it's literally like, "Come, Azim. Our fighting days are done. By nightfall, we'll celebrate with my father." And it's like, whoa. But the rumor is that either Costner was so exhausted that he couldn't figure out how to keep the accent between shots, or the rumor is that when they're in a fight, that's when Kevin Costner doesn't have the accent. When he and Reynolds are fighting behind the scenes, and when they're getting along, that's when he does have the accent. So there's just a bunch of, but again, that even became a meme.
Here's the thing.
Yeah, you know,
accents are hard, man. They really are. Like, if you don't know how to do it, if you haven't studied it and practiced it, it's hard to do. Right. I did an accent for a play once, and I had to have this like audio tape in my truck constantly playing, so I could like memorize my lines in the accent. So I could only say my lines with the accent, and so that's how I did it. And in fact, I had these like trigger sentences that I can say that was like put me into the accent, so I can do it. If I don't say that trigger sentence, then I can't get into it.
Yeah.
So that's important to do something like that if you're going to be doing an accent for a movie or a play.
Well, we can't all be Meryl Streep. You know what I mean?
Who wants to be?
I know. I even remember, was 13 Days with Kevin Costner? Was that a 90s movie? I like it.
The one, the JFK one that he did?
Yeah. Maybe that was 2000. I can't remember the year, but even his Southern accent in that one.
Well, he tried doing the Boston accent.
The Boston, not the Southern.
Yeah.
The Southern is JFK.
The Boston accent trigger sentence is, "Park your car in the Harvard Yard. Go up the stairs to the Bacardi party and party hard."
That's good. That's good. Yeah, I remember. So again, he was in JFK and he did a Southern accent, so he did that fine, and that was the same year as Robin Hood. So that's strange. But then, like in 13 Days, I remember him with the Boston accent being like, "This is not a permission slip. This is a report card." You're like, oh my God. I guess this is the accent we're going to go for. But, you know, Kevin Costner, they have his screen presence. Keanu Reeves has screen presence. John Voight has screen presence. So that's something. I don't know. It's just weird in the 90s how these accents are so notorious for either going way over the top or not even functional.
We're not trying at all.
Yeah, not trying at all. So it's just interesting. I mean, that's an old joke, making fun of Kevin Costner, Robin Hood, and Steve. You know what I mean? It's like, even the Men in Tights.
Men in Tights. They always
like some other Robin Hoods. I can speak an English accent. It's
everybody
knows what you're talking about. But when you do something like that, I think, we're talking 90s movies. That's the stuff that impacted us, whether for good or bad. So it's just interesting. Robin Hood is a good entertainment, and a lot of the, it has Rickman, it has Morgan Freeman, it has a bunch of good stuff in there. And so I don't want to lambast the movie, but yeah, Kevin Costner, what was it? Gleiberman said that it was a rouser without a rousing hero. So it's just interesting. So again, our bottom three, or top three, however you say. So mine were John Voight and Anaconda, Rod Steiger and The Specialist, and Kevin Costner and Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves. What were your three?
I had John Malkovich in Rounders, Keanu Reeves in Bram Stoker's Dracula, and Kevin Costner in Prince of Thieves.
All right, so that's fun. Thank you for coming up with that. That was as soon as you texted that to me, I started laughing. I'm like, that'll be fun to talk about. And I was able to go into YouTube clips and research the accents and things like that. So great. So okay, so we covered Pulp Fiction, we covered Forrest Gump. I believe it's your choice next. What's our next movie?
Well, this should kind of segue nicely. We talked about John Malkovich, so let's do Rounders, because it's a movie I've always wanted to talk about with you. It kind of got me excited about the game of Texas Hold'em poker, so we'll talk about that, and it should be a lot of fun.
Okay, so that's Matt Damon, Edward Norton, John Malkovich, directed by John Dahl, who did The Last Seduction, I believe, Red Rock West. I hope I'm getting that right. Some very, very good movies. So yeah, let's do Rounders. It sounds great. Okay, all right. So that's 1998. I'm going to tell you, I don't think I've ever seen Rounders.
You've got to watch it.
Okay. All right. As long as you're excited about it.
Oh, I'm really excited about it. I love this movie.
All right, then we'll do great. Okay, so all right, so Rounders from 1998. That'll be next time on NostalgiaCast. But until then, this is Darin Lundberg.
And I'm Johnny Craddock.
And we'll catch you next time, guys.